Tuesday. Today is a very special day. Want to just run through some highlights and then introduce our guest speaker. So this is our Founders Luncheon, and you will meet that gentleman in just a moment. He's amazing and wonderful. And then later today, we will have our President's Reception in the foyer area, where all of our activities have been, followed by our Robert M. Clyatt Award presentation and awards dinner. And this year we are adding a new state award as well. So we're very, very excited about that. Tomorrow, of course, is the annual meeting. You won't want to miss that. We've got some surprises and excitement planned for that. And then we'll end the day with some great regional networking sessions that we have established for more sharing between the states and collaboration. So that's the highlights of what's left of our conference. And I want to introduce you to the guy who made it all happen. So I'm from a tiny little town in North Florida. He's from a tiny little town about 90 minutes away in South Georgia. And that's about all we have in common, because he's a Georgia Bulldog fan and I'm not. However, we decided that we could love on each other as long as we weren't playing each other. So that's a good Football South fan story. But Bob Clyatt is an amazing human being. He has a heart, I would say as big as Texas, as the phrase goes, but he's from Georgia, so as big as the state of Georgia. He's caring about kids individually, about families, about volunteers, and most of all, about Kids Chance and the community that he started in 1988 in Georgia. I'm not going to tell you a lot about Bob or a lot about the story, because he does such a lovely job in his storytelling of revealing how part of him grew, and that's what grew into Kids Chance and then became Kids Chance of America. So without further ado, I'm introducing you to my favorite Georgia Bulldog fan, Mr. Robert M. Clyatt himself.
Kids Chance has come a long way, and you'll see from my remarks, I'm ashamed that I almost did not do it. And that's what brings me here to speak to you about Kids Chance, is you know why you're involved with Kids Chance. You know what it is in your heart that makes you help these children. And we all have something. But let me tell you how it started. It was in 1987. I was taking the deposition of an injured worker over in Albany, Georgia, which is a little South Georgia town. And I'm a defense attorney, so I take a lot longer in taking depositions because I'm paid by the hour. So I was rocking on about my third hour of asking questions of the injured worker, and he was hurt pretty bad. And I didn't know that he had his young daughter with him, and I didn't know that she was sitting out in the lobby, not knowing what was happening to her daddy sitting in the deposition room. And all of a sudden, bam, the door opened, and this little 10-year-old girl ran in, and she stood between me and her daddy and threw her arms around her daddy. She was wondering what was happening to it. And I was struck just at that moment about the battle in workers' compensation is between the injured worker and the employer-insurer. And there she was caught in the middle, and her life would never be the same. And the reason it wouldn't, her daddy had a serious injury, and he had no transferable skills. And you could see that this little girl wouldn't have many opportunities, and she probably would never have the opportunity to finish high school or go to college, which Kids Chance, as you know, provides. So I got with the claimant's attorney, and I said, hey, let's let's put a couple of $100 in. It was Christmas. I said, I'll put a couple of $100 in and you put a couple of $100 in and we'll buy this little girl some Christmas. So that's what we did. But that face stayed on my mind. I couldn't get away from it, and I couldn't get away from that struggle between the employer, insurer, and the injured worker. And so it kept saying, how can we give children of these injured workers, how can we give them an opportunity? Because she's not going to have one. She was the same age as my 10-year-old girl, and you could tell that they didn't have anything. She wore torn clothes. They were clean, but she wore torn clothes, and you could tell they just didn't have anything. And that's why we got up a couple of $100 to give her some Christmas. About that same time, about 2 weeks later, I was taking the deposition of another injured worker in the Okefenokee Swamp. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. It's a big swamp in deep South Georgia. And the main industry, as you would suspect, is cutting timber. And the fellow had been operating a chainsaw, and the saw buckled and ate him up. Just ate him up. And in the deposition, I like to find out if injured workers are motivated to return to work and want to return to work, because that makes a big impetus on the claim as to whether they're interested in returning to work. And I always like to find out about their home life, how many children they've got, what grades the children are in school. And I asked him, he said he had 4 children. And I said, well, after he named the first 3, what grade they were in, he came to the last one, and I said, how old is he? He said, he's 16. And I said, well, what grade is he in? And he looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, well, he was in the 9th grade, but he had to quit and take my place in the woods. And so there was somebody else that we were going to have to deal with in 20, 30 years, because he would have no transferable skills, this young kid. And if he got injured, he'd just have his workers' compensation money, and you can't live off of that. You know, it's so low, it's particularly low in Georgia. So that deposition, coupled with the young girl in Albany, really tore me up. And I couldn't get it off my mind. And I was riding, I was going, chance. We've got to give these kids a chance. Give them a chance to be better, to be something themselves. Give them a chance to use the God-given ability that God's given them. And so it hit me one day. I was on the way to Atlanta to argue a case in front of the appellate division. And about Cordeal, it hit me. Chance, kids' chance. Give these kids a chance. And so that's the way that started out. And I thought it was a good idea, but I came home and called the claimant's attorney that I did work with. He and I got to be buddies, and the administrative law judge had heard most of my cases. And I told him about what my idea was to found a educational scholarship to help fund the children of Georgia's seriously injured and deceased workers. And they all thought it was a great idea. Everybody that I talked to thought it was a great idea. So I was thinking, well, man, this is not going to be anything to this. And well, Lord knows I was wrong about that. But we started out like a house of fire until we ran into the big roadblock, the Internal Revenue Service. And those people are serious people, I'm telling you. when we hit the Internal Revenue Service, we didn't know what we were going to do. I didn't know what we were going to do. The package of information that we had to send to the lady up in Atlanta, we got it all up and we sent it. Nothing happened. So we called her. She said, you don't have this form, you don't have that form. So we got it all up and sent it to her again. And bear in mind, the reason we needed the Internal Revenue Services okay on Kids Chance was we were trying to be a 501c3 corporation, so we could deduct the donations on your income taxes. And so, third time we sent her a package of information. Called her up, nothing. You don't have it. Well, lady, please tell me what we don't have so we can get going with this thing. And she was not very helpful. Weeks turned into months, and this was still hanging, and months turned into many months. And it came to be that we were almost on a year of fooling with the Internal Revenue Service, and we were no closer to getting this thing done. And me, I thought to myself, this shows you what an idiot I was. I thought to myself, well, you're a pretty good old boy. You know, you look after your family, you have them in church on Sunday. Maybe this is not the thing for you to do. There's a lot of work to it, and maybe I'll get around to it later. I'll get around to it in another month or two. And I was playing that game with myself. When am I going to do it? And tomorrow was the day I was going to do it. And that just stretched on and on and on. And so everybody kind of forgot about Kids Chance, including me, until a big event. When I said I tried to have my children in church on Sunday, sometimes I don't want to sound like I'm a holy roller or anything like that, but sometimes I would get up and wouldn't have time to get dressed myself, and I can remember taking them in my underwear in my car. And I pulled under the veranda and opened the door and let them all jump out. And there I was. If somebody had stopped me, I would have been in a pot full of trouble. But I was going to make sure my kids were in Sunday school. So what happened was this. God spoke to me. And I don't mean a booming voice coming out of heaven or anything like that. He talked to me where I knew what I was supposed to do. And we were in church, and the preacher said, the title of the sermon today is "The Things I Have Left Undone." And I perked up a little bit because I was just thinking about the same thing. And he went into detail, and he said, Gandhi and Confucius and all other religions and stuff, including Christianity and Judaism and Muslims, all had a way of giving back and doing the right thing. And so I was not acting with compassion. And that's what this called for, acting with compassion. And so as he preached, I slid further and further down into my seat because I knew he was talking to me. And he was shaming me. He was. I was honestly did slide further into my seat thinking he wouldn't see me. And he got to the part in his sermon where he talked about the Good Samaritan. And back in the Middle East at that time, there were a lot of different tribes and stuff, and the Samaritans were the ones that everybody looked down on. They weren't the good people. And he told the parable of the Good Samaritan, and you'll remember it, where the injured traveler lay beside the road, beaten and robbed, and the two church-going people, the priest and the Levite, came up to where he was and stopped and looked and walked to the other side of the road and kept on going. They didn't stop and show any compassion to him. And so here comes the Good Samaritan, the lowest guy on the totem pole, so to speak. But he stopped and rendered aid to the fellow. And he took him to an inn and told the innkeeper, here's some money where he can rest up. I'll be back through here in a week or two, and I'll pay you what I owe you when I come back through. So as he was talking about the Good Samaritan, he was kicking me in the butt even more. I'm serious. I was almost in tears because I felt like every word that came out of this preacher's mouth seemed like it was directed toward me. And I was not happy with myself. And I realized that I'd almost given up on this. So what I did, well, that was on Sunday, of course, and I went to the church office the next day on Monday and got a copy of the typed up sermon. And I read it and read it and read it. And in fact, all that week, I had the sermon, I'd pull my desk open and I'd slide that sermon in it so I could be sitting down like that, acting like I was working on a file, on a case. And I was going through that sermon. And everybody was saying, boy, Bob's pretty attentive today. But I read it every day until Friday. And that Friday, I was fired up. I mean, that sermon, I was ready to charge through a wall. So I picked up the telephone and called this lady with the Internal Revenue Service. I can't for the life of me remember her name. I thought I'd never forget it. But I called her up and I said, this is Bob Clyatt. I'm with Kids Chance. You remember, we've had all these talks and we've sent you all this information and you still not approved us. And I'm coming Monday. This coming Monday, I'm coming Monday and I'm staying in your office until you approve it. I said, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be there when the doors open and I'm staying until y'all run me out. But we're going to get this thing approved. She laughed at me, which was not the right thing to do. She laughed at me and she said, well, you can come if you want to, Mr. Clyatt, but I'm not going to see you and it's not going to make any difference. And I couldn't understand why she was being so obstinate about it, because it was a good idea. We had all these people behind us. And with all these children, this unmet need of these children who needed our help. So Monday came. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's from Valdosta, Georgia, where I'm from, to Atlanta's about 4 hours, 250 miles. So I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I drove up to the 12 stories of the Internal Revenue Service, and it looked like a castle. And I got out, and I was the first one off the elevator when they opened for business. And I opened the door after the lady came in and unlocked it. And I opened the door and I went in. I told the receptionist who I was and what I was there for. I said, I'm here for Kids Chance, and I'm here to see Mrs. So-and-so, let's say Smith. And she said, okay, let me tell her. And she went back, she excused herself, and she went back and told the lady, and the lady said, well, I'm not going to see you. And she came back and told me that, and that's when I launched into a speech I said, let me tell you something. You can tell her that I'm here, I'm going to be here, and I'm not leaving. It's now 8:15 in the morning, and I'll be here all day until y'all look at this Kids Chance information that we sent you and you approve it. She said, well, let me go tell her again. So she went and told her. And then the lady came up there, and I was still fuming. I was fuming. And she came up, I introduced myself, and I said, like I said to the other lady, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'm going to stay until this gets approved. And she started laughing at me. I thought, oh no, I'm going to get in some kind of trouble for cussing this lady out. And she laughing at me. I said, ma'am, you don't know how serious I am about this. And she said, no, I'm laughing at you because I just approved it. I said, I told you I was going to stay here. I said, did you say you just approved it? And she said, yes, sir, I just approved it. And I'm convinced that what she did was when she saw how serious Kids Chance was and what it was to do, what it was for, who it was to help, and how serious Kids Chance was, and that we were not going to leave them alone. We were going to be there and stay until they approved it. I think she moved it off the back of her desk to the front of her desk and looked for truly the first time. 2 weeks, just a mere 2 weeks from that day when she approved it, we had a televised press conference at Governor Joe Frank Harris's office in Atlanta at the Georgia Capitol. We gave out the first 2 scholarships just 2 weeks later, and that's where it started. And then after that, everybody wanted to get involved. Now, I'm not saying that it was easy money. The first $100 we collected was the hardest to get, but we found the volunteers. We got good people to work on our board. We're going to honor tonight in his memory Doug McCoy, who was one of those good people who we put on the board. I'll tell you a little story about Doug McCoy. We went to our first board meeting, and I put Doug on the board because when I was calling around to find out who would be the best representatives from each section, you know, labor, medical, insurance, so on and so forth, and I called and asked him about who was the best insurance, and I called 10 people, and all 10 of them said Doug McCoy. I didn't have a single person that wanted anybody else but Doug McCoy. And I put him on the board, and we were having our first board meeting at a Atlanta law firm. And we were in the conference room. To show you how determined he was, is what I'm trying to do. The conference room table, the conference room itself abutted a sidewalk, and then beside the sidewalk was a very busy road. And we were sitting in there waiting for everybody to get there, and I heard this awful sound. It was a crash, boom. I knew what it was. I mean, it was a car wreck. It was a pretty serious car wreck. So we jumped up, ran out of the board meeting, and I looked, and there was a cab that Doug McCoy was getting out of. The cab was totaled. But Doug was getting out of it, and he said, let's start the meeting. That's how determined he was. Let's start the meeting. And that's the kind of spirit we had with the volunteers, just like y'all are, just exactly like y'all are. I'm so proud of him, and he was lost to us far too soon. I know many of you in here have stories to tell about Doug McCoy, but he was one of the finest gentlemen I've ever met in my life. He'd do anything for you and do anything for Kids Chance. He was like the Johnny Appleseed. He had, as claims manager for Travelers, he flew across the country. And he would, like in St. Louis, where Bob Keith is. Bob, where are you at? Yeah, he left. But anyway, they stopped and got Kids Chance going in St. Louis and many other cities Doug helped to do. And so tonight, I hope you'll give a warm round of appreciation to Doug's family, to his wife Teresa, and to his family, because he was a giant among men with Kids Chance. And so we got started. We gave out the first 2 scholarships. Like this year, Debbie Mason gave me the figures. This year we've given out 734 scholarships. Since inception, we've given out 11,400 scholarships. Isn't that great? The figure that I like is the big figure. We raised $42 million. Every time I come to speak, I pray that I say the right thing and that I touch people in some way. And I hope that I've touched somebody here today so that you understand that it's not us who did Kids Chance. It's to God be the glory, great things he hath done. That's where Kids Chance comes from. And I don't care whether you're black, white, Catholic, Protestant, Jew, Muslim, whatever. We all answer to a higher power. And when you know what's right to do it, just like you're doing now with Kids Chance. I'm ashamed that I almost didn't do it. That's why it's hard for me to talk about it. But I appreciate y'all listening to me this morning. Thank you.